Welcome back, everybody, to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica,
I'm Jess.
and we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threats to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. We have reached the last episode on our 6 core emotions series, where we are going to be looking at how do we cope with feelings of shame. We are going to review our Am I the Asshole post, which is titled, Am I the Asshole for Having Enough of My Father's Narcissism? So, my husband and I got married in November of last year. We are both in our 30s, and my parents are in the picture, but his mother isn't because of the same issue I'm having with my father. My father has displayed narcissistic personality disorder since I was a child, such as calling me a bitch when I was 10 and me feeling like I'm walking on eggshells whenever I'm around him. My mother has always been the enabler, and whenever he was in one of his moods, he would start a fight and then gaslight. I didn't hesitate to tell him when his behavior was harmful, but no one has believed me about his personality, as he is charismatic and makes everyone believe he is a nice guy. That was until my husband and I got married. We were living with them for a short time while we got our apartment. After we moved, they offered that we could do their laundry at their house since our apartment didn't have a washer and dryer. They've recently decided to sell their house, and since my husband and I work full-time jobs, I don't know when they have house showings, so we always call them to ask if we can come over and do laundry. My mother is easily manipulated and is now showing the same agitation my father does and says, "Why do we need to tell you everything?" Mind you, I have done everything for myself for years, so this statement showed me how much gaslighting I have endured. My husband was listening to this conversation and became upset. My husband then told me my father was stressing over a showing a while back, and when he patted my father on the shoulder to reassure him, my father then goes to my mother to say he was uncomfortable with my husband doing that. Before we got married, my father threatened me, saying, "Your husband will find out what sort of person you are if you make me look bad, and he won't love you anymore." When I would get upset and tell him I've had enough, he calls my husband to say I'm overreacting and I'm insane. Recently, with this laundry thing, I was excited about something and called my mother, but I got treated like I was a nuisance, and my husband, being the observer, says they seem to only focus on the negative and make you do that too. I told my mother I'm tired of the abuse, and she calls my husband to complain about me going silent. There's an update. My father sent a long text to my husband saying he doesn't know why I'm acting like this, and the constant emotional trauma from me is giving my mother anxiety and high blood pressure. For the record, she's always had both. It's nothing new. He's trying to hurt my marriage. I'm tired of how my father behaves. It's the last straw when he tries to convince my husband it was a mistake to marry me. So, am I the asshole for having enough?
Yeah. So we said basically they're all to blame a little bit in this scenario. We said the main culprit here was poor boundary setting or ambiguous boundary setting by the author. There's triangulation going on where mom and dad are being really icky by calling the husband to complain about the author. So we said author probably needs to get better at assertive communication. Husband needs to get better at like conversational boundary setting. And then mom and dad need to be keeping their thoughts to within their own marriage or talking to the daughter directly if they have some kind of issue with something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then to, I guess, recap episode 1. So episode 1 of shame. We said the function of shame is to tell us when we've broken one of our own rules. So if we have too much shame, that's where we get into worthlessness and self-loathing, and not enough shame, we get into narcissism and sometimes narcissistic personality disorder. So shame in a productive way helps hold us accountable in alignment with our values. That was kind of the
gist of it.
The most important parts, right? Yeah. To build off of. So in this episode, we're going to go in. I think we're going to kind of focus probably a little bit more on the worthlessness side of things, more so than dealing with the narcissism. Narcissists tend to not get therapy, and if you have a personality disorder, one of the qualities of that is that it is persistent and pervasive, meaning that you're going to have that for the rest of your life, and it probably won't get too much better. There's some interventions that you can do, but that's what really makes it different from a personality trait, is that it's going to last a lifetime. So given that, we'll focus more on the worthlessness since that's a little bit more opportunity for intervention. And then in the end, we could talk a little bit about how we might deal with a narcissist if they were to present to therapy. I think sometimes it can be hard to know if you are somebody who has excessive shame, because sometimes that can still look like functional, like you're prioritizing other relationships. Maybe you feel like maybe it's even an overcorrection from or an expression of like humility or sometimes. And so I think as a clinician that shame is difficult to notice, and excessive shame is difficult to notice because it's an internal experience. Shame is an internal emotion. And so I think a lot of the times for those of us who present with like worthlessness, it's really kind of this our own internal world where we're maybe doing like a lot of self-depreciating thoughts. Maybe we're really like minimizing or deflecting things that we're doing well, don't have a good inventory of like our own strengths. And so you know, lots of times I think I've noticed when people who deal with worthlessness present to therapy, they say something like, I've just lost myself, or I've stopped prioritizing myself, or something like that. Or how, like, so what, like if you were to tell somebody, hey, you're probably dealing with like excessive worthlessness or excessive shame, how would how do you tell them, like, what are like the red flags of that if that's going on for somebody?
My experience with this, clients are presenting, a lot of times they're feeling overwhelmed.
Ooh, yeah.
And they're feeling like they just can't do it anymore. And so I think a lot of that just comes from the lack of boundary setting, the lack of asking for help. We kind of alluded to this in Tuesday's episode, but just like everybody else is busy with their own life, so I don't want to impose and ask them for help even though I really need help. Or I don't want to say no because they obviously need help. But all of that is tied in with low self-worth, where you're saying their sense of time and sense of balance is worth more than your own.
Ooh, I like that.
So that's usually how I phrase that. And so I'll ask them, why is their peace of mind more important than yours? Why is their ability to have some downtime and relax more important than yours? Well, I don't want to ask my husband because he gets home from work and he needs to relax. Well, you work too. And then you came home and you made dinner and you're changing the laundry around.
Yeah.
You don't relax until the kids go to bed and he gets to relax the second he walks in the door. That's a bit unfair. There could be some more balance in that relationship.
Yeah.
And you could communicate. I don't need you to do it the second you walk in the door. You can decompress for a little bit.
Same thing of like my needs are somehow inflicting harm on others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we use the word exploding doormat in here where we're talking describe it as a passive person, kind of stuff and then explodes. It's almost like the shame person kind of self-depreciates, makes themselves smaller and smaller and smaller. Then they're just like almost like this explosive, like, fuck it, I need to prioritize myself. I can't do this anymore, of this like almost like explosive helplessness that comes out sometimes.
Yeah. And that's usually where I see them. They're in that cycle or they just came out of that. So they've had some kind of insight to this cannot continue this way.
Yeah. I think humor can be both a medicine and like a sign of a symptom. I notice that a lot of times clients, if maybe are trying to protect the emotions of others, they might make these little self-hating comments, but then they'll kind of make it as a joke where they're saying something really true, but because they're laughing, people aren't hearing what they're saying. But like when, you know, as a therapist, when we're in there and a client says something really self-depreciating and they laugh and then I don't laugh, they're like, oh shit. Oh, my deflection has been disarmed and now I'm super vulnerable, you know. And then also I call them shame attacking exercises, where sometimes getting a little perspective and making something silly can reduce the threat of it. So this comes up the most with like social anxieties, but if you do something that actively like embarrass yourself, you learn, okay, this isn't that big a deal. I can feel self-conscious in public. I can make a fool of myself and it feels silly, but like the world goes on. I'm still who I am. My essence has not changed. And so almost like purposely like exposing yourself to those experiences, that people's reactions to you does not change your own worth.
I was chuckling because I felt slightly hypocritical, because as we go through and edit, you know, all of our little stumbles or, you know, tongue ties.
Oh yeah, cut them out.
Always get cut out.
We can only present this super, competent, articulate versions of ourselves here.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I've listened to a whole podcast, or like we love their what was that magazine? I remember when I was like in high school, and people would just write on like these horrific, embarrassing stories that have happened. But there's something really freeing about laughing about this thing that's really embarrassing, because it makes you not shame is private. So by making it public and airing it out, I think it really minimizes it. And what makes it worse is when we're holding it to ourselves. And so, know who is your safe people. But I think one of the best things to deal with shame is to tell the story and like laugh about it with somebody if you're able to. Because we all do things that are embarrassing, or we all have things that we wish didn't happen that we feel bad about. It's part of being a human being.
Yeah. That's a good skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And people constantly be really willing to go actively embarrass themselves. This is like one of that tail end of a gradual exposure hierarchy, right? We're doing something publicly embarrassing. Do you ever do the fake it till you make it? Is that a skill you teach clients?
Sometimes, mostly in regards to like confidence. If they're not confident in doing something, sometimes I'm going to tell them, I want you to just do it anyway. And eventually, when you do it enough times, the confidence will come. So we are going to fake it till we make it. Sometimes they're attempting to fake it till they make it. And I was like, this is not one of those things you can just do until it happens.
Yeah. Right? That's one of the like gaslighting your soul. Like,
yeah. So if they're, doing the thing and then constantly telling themselves they suck, that confidence is never going to come, because you're still telling yourself you suck. If you do the thing you do and you just say, I did that, you don't even have to like hype yourself up with it, then eventually the confidence will come. If that makes sense.
I like you said when we were prepping that confidence is having balanced shame.
Yeah.
To where we're not thinking that we're the hottest shit in Texas, right? Like we're not leading toward that narcissism, but we're not also self-depreciating to the fact that we've like dehumanized ourselves sometimes. And so it's having, I use the term of like appropriate awareness of where we exist in the universe, and confidence like is that balance there. And I like it like we'll talk here in a few minutes about the role of like confidence in dating. And I which I was looking at my caseload, I was really surprised that like this is an issue I talk about almost exclusively with, I have maybe one female client, but almost exclusively with men, where the dating confidence is really low, which makes sense. Societally, generally we expect men to like initiate dating and things like that. But when I'm talking through a client who has like high shame in dating, I'll have them give me an example of like who's somebody that you think is really good with the ladies, or who's a really confident guy, and I'll have them kind of describe this person to me, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna imitate this guy for the next week, and we're gonna see what this is like, to where it's almost like putting on a costume, so it can feel kind of safe because you're being a little bit disingenuous because you're imitating somebody, but it's this idea that like you can behave this way whether or not you feel this way. And again, if you do something enough and you have new data, if you've been acting confident enough, then at some point you're going to be like, well, maybe I am confident because I'm consistently able to do this. I like that skill again because I think it accesses skills that you don't know that you have, but that you obviously are able to imitate because you can do it. So acting as if you are confident can bring about confidence. I've had people push back on this, saying that it makes them feel like they're like liars, or
I've done that with like affirmations. Somebody was like, I feel like I'm lying to myself and I don't want to lie, and so I'll say, what would make this true? Can we take this statement and rework it? This is just the affirmation off the internet. We don't have to go with this. We can edit it. What would feel true?
So we want to make this sure that the narratives we're telling ourselves are believable, even if they're maybe not presently felt. We can still believe them.
Yeah.
And with confidence, especially in dating, again, that would be kind of my overarching kind of one-stop shop coping skill on that, would be the fake it till you make it. But I think, going back to, we talked about in episode 1 of shame, body image and stuff like that. Like even, if you're a guy if I say, what's an outfit where you feel most confident? What's like your sexiest outfit? You should have one. You should have these spots where you just feel like you're just kind of swagging out. And I think, take that time for that self-care, just like we do. I think we're really good at encouraging women now to do that, but like guys need that same thing. And like, if you dress in a way that's going to attract people that you want to be around, do you know how you carry yourself? It's not cutting your own hair at home, man. Go get a freaking haircut, right? Like spend money on a nice pair of jeans. Like, you have to like be providing that to yourself, and that's going to be spilling out. But a lot of it's just acting as if you are that way already. Because I think how we feel on the outside matches how we feel on the inside. Just like if my house is a disaster, I'm probably anxious and overwhelmed. And if I'm taking care of myself, I probably don't feel very good about myself. And you love things more that you nurture. I love my dogs because I take care of them. And that's I kid him because I love them, but that works with yourself too. So you're not going to feel great about yourself if you're not nurturing yourself. Which I know is almost kind of like white noise sometimes. I think about self-care, like what the hell is that?
Yeah.
But it's, I guess, talking about self-care, because I'm a little bit skeptical too, because I think self-care has been targeted a lot towards like a capitalistic model towards women of saying what is self-care is spending a lot of money on stuff that is vanity oriented or beauty oriented. I think that's also kind of damaging. But at the essence, like, how do you talk to clients about self-care?
I explain it in a way, basically, I tell my clients self-care means you do things for yourself that makes you feel loved.
Ooh.
And so if they're having a hard time identifying that, we go to like their attachments. What do your friends do? What do your romantic partners have done in the past? What do your parents do? What do they do that makes you feel really loved and cared for?
Oh, it's almost like the 5 love languages applied to self, huh?
Yeah.
Ooh, I like that.
And so sometimes that is, treating yourself to something new or getting your hair or nails done. Sometimes that is self-care, but a lot of times it's just taking care of yourself. Well, I like when my partner cooks me dinner. It's great.
Cook yourself dinner.
You cook yourself dinner.
Ooh.
And we say that's self-care, because if you go through the drive-thru, then you're going to beat yourself up and tell yourself you have no self-control and you're never going to hit your weight loss goals.
Yeah. I guess I use this in the talking about, with goal setting. I think having positive reinforcement is really important. So talk about like rewarding yourself for achievements. But I like talking about this in the context of self-care also, because a lot of times my clients, I'm like, what might feel good? And I have no idea. I have no idea what that is. Yeah. And so I say there's 4 kind of categories of rewards. And I think these can really fall into self-care too. The 4 categories are tangible, social, self-care, and health. So tangible, social, self-care, and health. So examples of a tangible reward would be something that you can purchase, something materialistic. This could be, clothing that you've been wanting. Maybe like I love plants. Maybe it's buying myself a plant, something that I've had my eye on, maybe that I've been saving for. A social would be something like buying myself concert tickets, planning a trip with friends, protecting my calendar to go grab a dinner date with somebody. Self-care would be, again, something that makes you feel loved. Some clients, this is going and getting, a fancy coffee in the morning instead of making one at home. This could be getting a pedicure. This could be cleaning my room. And then health would be something, again, these could also overlap too, but health would be maybe getting myself a new workout outfit. This could be getting a water bottle that helps me drink water, getting myself like a Theragun for my sore muscles, something that helps myself get engaged in movement and like nutrition kind of focus things. And so if you're not maybe sure ways of like kind of caring for yourself, I think using those general broad kind of reward categories can be a good place to start there.
Yeah. The other thing I talk about with self-care is listening to what you need and giving that to yourself.
Like, I feel like rest was the first one that comes to my mind.
Yep. Or I use the example of like cooking for yourself instead of going through the drive-thru. Sometimes you're just exhausted.
Yeah.
Sometimes going through the drive-thru is self-care.
Yeah,
Sometimes
depends on the day.
cooking at home is self-care. So it's
Yeah.
also then we have to have some mental flexibility and not become really rigid in what does self-care look like, because your needs are going to change day to day, moment to moment. And
Yeah.
so part of self-care is just listening to what you need and giving that to yourself.
I was thinking, I heard this, I'm gonna botch it. I heard the phrase that said something like the the thing that most leads to relationship issues is both parties losing focus on themselves. It's something like, because then we start outsourcing. So if we're not meeting our own needs, we're gonna start looking for our partners to fill that need, which that causes its a whole other issues. But a lot of times it comes down to scorekeeping of like all the ways that this person is not meeting my needs, because we're focused on ourselves instead of like giving to that relationship or focusing on what we can bring to it. And so a lot of times when we talk about, what's the remedy to relationship issues? Self-care. What's the relationship to confidence? Self-care. And it feels almost kind of counterintuitive that like what we need to do better with others is to do better with ourselves. But like you can't transmit something you don't have. It's like if you don't love which we hear that all the time, like what the hell does that freaking mean? But it's really like being able to be still with yourself and have positive thoughts about yourself. I think is like one of the essence to functioning in like all different kind of domains there.
Mm-hmm. I read a thing on Instagram the other day. I cannot remember who it was because I follow a couple different therapists, but essentially says being in a relationship does not mean you don't have to do your own work, or your partner loving you does not mean you don't have to figure out how to love yourself.
Yeah. I guess, and again, this is like a pop culture word now. For you as a therapist, what does it look like when you look at your clients? How do you know when somebody has good self-care or good self-love?
They are able to set boundaries. They're able to ask for help. They're able to take accountability when they've made mistakes. I think all of that is tied together with self-care and self-worth.
Yeah, I think so too. I think like this leads back into values, and like our episode it was Joy Part 2, where we talked about how to find your own values. I think for me, like, I mean, I always grew, I was always a boy crazy, and so everybody's like, you gotta learn to love yourself. And I all through high school and college, I'm like, what in the actual fuck does that mean? I'm in my 20s, I'm like, what do you mean? And I think what made the difference for me was when I learned about values, and I got to say, okay, like what activities make me feel like I'm living this value? Because that brought like a sense, I was able to find a sense of satisfaction in life that I didn't need anybody else to provide for me. And I think once I identified my values and was doing that, that's when I was like, the more time that you spend doing things that are meaningful to you, the more the meaningful life feels. And so it sounds simplified, but like when a client says, how do I work on my self-esteem? I say, you gain self-esteem by doing esteemable acts. It's like you need to do things that you think are respectable. You need to behave in a way of somebody that you admire, because that's going to make you feel good. And so, we talk about like maybe that looks like, opening the door for little old ladies, doing random acts of kindness. Maybe that means sometimes doing something that's challenging, something that you don't want to do, or again, like volunteering or stuff like that too. And so I think it's thinking, when I'm working with a client who has low self-esteem or confidence issues, it really is that fake it till you make it and doing esteemable things. I just can't reiterate the importance enough of like values, but I think that's what made like the difference for me. And so I really incorporate that a lot into like my therapy modality also. What's been, I don't know if this is too much self-disclosure, but what's been your process with like self-love and self-esteem?
Ugh.
The fuck to use humor if you
I mean, like most people, it changed. It was really low through like adolescence, and I would even say through high school.
Yeah.
I think in college, I was able to appreciate myself, take care of myself, say no. I got some more independence, so it became easier to set some boundaries and being able to invest in doing things that I wanted to do. So I didn't know it back then, but doing value congruent things. So that's kind of where that shift happened.
Yeah.
And some days are better than others. Like some days I still struggle and I beat myself up, and it's like, well, We're not perfect.
Yeah, we can have off days.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I told y'all in the Joy episode that I literally have my values written down on a sticky note on my computer. And so I was looking down one of my top values is literally self-esteem. And I qualified it with, these are things related to like fitness, moderation, and growth was like how I define self-esteem also. And so I think moderation on there for me is part of my self-esteem and confidence because I'm inclined towards lack of moderation in many things. And so for me that implies a sense of like self-control that I'm deciding, I'm being really deliberate about quantities. I'm not letting say food. I'm choosing what I eat. I'm not letting the chocolate decide how much chocolate I eat, right? Or if I have a drink of alcohol, I'm not letting the alcohol decide how much more alcohol I drink. I decide how much more alcohol I drink. And then, growth is that just getting uncomfortable and looking for ways to, improve and like noticing positive changes in myself and getting out of my comfort zone is important to me too. Doing adventurous things. Yeah, I'm a high anxiety person, but I still purposely like doing things that are adventurous because that's important to me. And so those values are so important in self-esteem and building that up. I think, yeah, my biggest thing with shame would probably like body image. That's probably the thing I struggle with the most, but
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
It's up a lot.
Yeah. I think that's for a lot of people though. I know for a lot of my clients.
Yeah. And with a lot of the, especially body image, we talk a lot about like self-compassion and like self-expectations. I know you do a lot of work like this on your caseload. What are those conversations like?
Yeah. So expectations, I think, can lead into the shame cycle. And I think weight loss is an easy analogy to use where, let's say we want to lose 20 pounds in 4 months. So we're going to set a goal of 5 pounds a month, which surface level seems healthy. They say 1 to 2 pounds a week. So we're kind of in that sweet spot there. So we set the goal and we don't meet it the first month. So then the second month, instead of keeping our goal or maybe even lowering it since we had a hard time the first month, we double it.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden I got to lose 10 pounds this month because I have to lose the 5 for this month and the 5 from last month. And then when we don't, we feel really shitty. We probably engage in some self-sabotage. So maybe we're binge eating or we're feeling really depressed, so we're not getting out and going to the gym. We beat ourselves up mentally and tell ourselves how, unmotivated we are and how lazy we are and how we have no self-control.
Yeah.
And that just continues because then we're going to go into the third month and now we magically have to lose 15 pounds and we feel really shitty about ourselves. And our self-worth is so low. We don't care enough about ourselves at this point to do the work to improve it.
That's such a ingrained cycle. And that anytime we're engaging in that like compensatory behavior, it's like a form of like self-punishing, where it's like I did not meet my own expectations, therefore I need to kind of, it's called self-flatulation, like you like whip yourself or whatever. But it's like this process where it's like then the most helpful thing to do is, it sounds simple, is to like just the phrase let it go. Okay. Oh my gosh, yesterday I binge ate and I had 5,000 calories. Today I have maybe, so I'm not going to eat today to make up for yesterday. It's like that is the worst possible thing you can do. Just let it go. Yesterday was yesterday. Get back to just reset today. Don't engage in any compensatory behaviors or restrictive behaviors. That's not sustainable.
Yeah.
What do you think are the barriers towards like people engaging in that self-care? Or I guess if we gave the example of like some kind of weight loss goals, what do you think tends to be the difficulties there?
A fear of failure. I get that quite a bit where, what if I don't hit this goal? Then you don't hit it. But we definitely won't hit it if we don't do anything.
Yeah.
And maybe we won't lose 5 pounds. Maybe we lose 2, but that's 2 more than we lost last month.
Yeah.
And so now we know what comes easy to us. We know what's more difficult for us, and we can adjust for the following month.
I think it's like a tying kind of into perfectionism too, where it's like people say, well, I can't start that now because I can't do it perfectly. So I can't do it. I have to wait to start my intuitive eating on Monday because I overate today, where it's every chance to get like a reset, but we lose track of that, I think.
Yeah. I think shame plays a big part in perfectionism. We talked about it, I think, in anxiety as well, where perfectionism can be a function of anxiety, but it can also be a function of shame, where we feel we don't have any worth unless we're perfect.
And any not self-met expectation is a failure, perceived failure. Yeah.
So it's easier said than done, but part of overcoming that is to set realistic expectations for ourselves.
And so that looks like if you're working with a client maybe who continues to not meet their own goals, you would say, let's look at the initial expectations, because maybe we're not being realistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which one of these goals did we meet and which one didn't we meet?
I have a client who his goal is to like work out every day, but then
unrealistic.
Right. And so but we're struggling to be open to that. Whereas he does about twice a week is where he's at right now. And so, in session we'll talk about what went on this week, what were the barriers there. And then every week we talk about, well, what do you want to do this week? What do you be intentional about to complete that goal? And he'll say something like, I'm just going to get to the gym. After about 3 weeks, I'm like, it sounds like you're saying the way I solve this problem is just to solve the problem, and then the problem will solve itself. Like just saying, oh, well, the reason I'm not doing it because I haven't done it. So if I just start doing it, then I'll do it. It's like, this is obviously not working for you, right? So if every week you find yourself telling yourself, if you're saying, okay, every week on Monday I'm resetting, you're doing that same thing of thinking that suddenly you're just going to feel different and have all these new skills to have a different outcome. We're like, you need to focus on a 5% change. It takes time. So if you're caught in this shame pattern, look at what you are expecting of yourself.
Yeah,
absolutely. We'll do maybe a whole other episode on this. I think like food rules I talk about a lot.
Yes.
And like diet culture is so shame bound.
Yeah.
And it's so based on like this fascination of like restriction and it's just, we talk about like food rules. I grew up with rules like you get dessert once a day and it's always at night after dinner, or those are good, only have one soda a day. Those could be good food rules. But sometimes we get into what happens is we get these categories of like bad food and good food, where it's all nutrition, and it blows my clients' minds when I say it turns out you're allowed to eat whatever you want whenever you want it, and it's like, oh, that's bad, I'm gonna lose control. The key is, you have a cup, you are really present with your food. So you take a couple bites of cake, you notice how rich it is, how filling it is. You notice when that last bite doesn't taste quite as good as the first bite. That's called satiation. So it's like attuning to that, but you can eat cake for breakfast if you want, right? But if you know how to stop when you are satiated and practice that intuitive eating, you don't have to have food rules, and you could still be alignment with like your goals. And so a lot of times we have to explore like these rigidities that we have maybe about a shame pattern that we have, or what relationships are supposed to look like, or what sex is supposed to be like, or all these other things, where if we have these rules that are restrictive, we need to explore those sometimes.
Yeah.
So coping with high shame with worthlessness, we talked about self-esteem and like confidence. We talked about the value of like faking it till you make it and acting as if for like confidence. That's a good rule of thumb, especially with like dating or interacting with other people. And then we talked about the value of doing values congruent activities just to increase our own self-worth and to feel more satisfied with life. So if you're not sure where to start with excessive shame, those are, I think, are really two good starting points.
The other one I use a lot with my clients, because shame is an internal emotion. We need to do some change with our internal dialogue with ourselves. And so we do this self-compassion statement, and I got it from one of my books, and I couldn't even tell you which one. But it's, given the fact that it's normal that I would. Given the fact that I haven't worked out in the past 6 months, it's normal I would struggle to get started.
Oh, I love that. I like that phrase. I think it's very normalizing, because I think what causes a lot of distress is this like white knuckling of like, we should do these things, where it's like, sometimes if we just can remove a little bit of pressure. And like, I think normalizing can do that, where it's, I don't have to go against the grain, because where else would I be but with the current,
Yeah. So when we start beating ourselves up and telling ourselves we're lazy or we're unmotivated, we notice we're doing that. So it does take some mindfulness practice. And then we implement the self-compassion.
So given that blank, it's normal that I?
Kind of that basic framework.
I like that.
Or given the fact that.
Oh, given the fact that blank.
Yeah. So it could be something you're doing or just a life experience, right? Given the fact that I was in a car accident, it's normal I would have anxiety driving.
That's a lot what I do as a therapist, of being like, that, I think you're having a pretty appropriate reaction given what you've experienced. That's a lot of what I do. And people are like, yeah, that's true. You know, that's all kind of what we need sometimes. And it's hard to do that for ourselves. But I love that question. I think teaches us how to start doing that.
Yep. So one of my clients was like, well, then I started shaming myself because I wasn't self-compassionate. It's like, so we use that same framework, right? Given the fact that I've been highly critical for the past 30 years, it's normal I would struggle to be compassionate with myself.
Yeah.
And then we go back. Once we do that, then we be compassionate for the original thing. So we do it twice.
I think it's like putting your thumb over like a water hose. You know, it's like you have to fight so much. If you just turn down the faucet, like it depressurizes the system.
Yeah.
You know, and I think sometimes it's a lot easier to follow through on something when there's less pressure, because then we don't have to get avoidant. The anxiety's less, the shame's less. It's just an overall de-energized situation, which can be really helpful.
Yeah. The other one I use is kind of like a compliment sandwich modality. So if you beat yourself up and say something mean about yourself, you also have to say something nice. So at that point, the pressure is not to stop saying the negative things, but we also want to say a positive. And eventually then we'll say 2 positives. And eventually we'll outnumber the negatives with the positives.
I like that. So that's letting somebody that's meeting somebody where they're at, right? That like, we understand that you aren't going to have overnight this whole change of self-view, right? But that's moving towards more an accurate inventory.
Yeah.
Of self there. And a lot, I think, you know, talk about affirmations. I'll normally tell clients, I say something like, I know this is cheesy therapeutic bullshit, but there is something to it, where like repetition is impactful and repetition changes thought processes. So when we tell ourselves over and over again, like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure, I can never get to the gym, I suck. Oh my gosh, I'm such a failure, I don't go to the gym, I suck. That's just by repetition and exposure, that's going to be integrated into like your core belief system. But it can go the other way too. So, which again, I'll try to have clients usually start with 5, and I'll encourage them to put it on like their bathroom mirror normally, just somewhere where they are a lot. And, you know, learning, there's lots of different types of learning, but if you're able to combine like a reading, and then also you hear yourself say it, that's auditory and it's kinesthetic. So like, you are going to have a better chance believing affirmations when you are saying them out loud to yourself. And like we talked about, we want affirmations to be believable. So we're not going to say something, you know, something outrageous of like, I'm the hottest person who's ever lived. It might be silly, like exaggerate that, but we're going to find something like, I have pretty eyes, or people compliment my eyelashes, or whatever it is. It could be something other people notice about you that sometimes like help that starting. But I think checking in on the narratives you're telling yourselves also. Yeah. But I think some clients find affirmations more helpful than others. Is that one you use often?
Yeah, it's hit or miss.
Yeah, it's like that planting a positive thought. Some people like it, some don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like, you know, even the idea of you know, giving yourself a hug sometimes. Like I do this with clients, especially if they've had like a death and are like craving kind of like even contact with somebody. There's something really nice about like giving yourself a hug and kind of, you know, rubbing your back a little bit and like rubbing your shoulders, because it's like a tenderness for yourself, and we don't really interact with ourselves in that way a lot. But I like a little self hug too. Feels nice. Squeeze the bejeebus out of yourself, you know. Yeah. Like those. So we haven't talked about the other end, which is coping with narcissism. And this is a challenge because narcissists aren't aware that they need to cope with their behaviors. So I'm not sure how productive it is, But so if you are for some reason some kind of an anomaly of a narcissist who would like to work on not being narcissistic, do you have any suggestions on coping for that person?
Yes. We do empathy building is probably the number one skill. And so a couple of things I'll have them do is before they respond, they have to practice imagining what they would feel in that situation.
If they were to treat themselves like they were going to treat somebody?
Yeah. So if, their significant other is bringing up a concern or saying, I don't appreciate it when I have to ask you 3 times to do something, or I have to ask you for help multiple times. We're like, okay, if you had to ask them for help multiple times, what would that feel like? Would you feel cared for? Yeah, so it's fair to say they're probably feeling that too.
Yeah. Because narcissism doesn't, there is kind of a lack of empathy, just like with an antisocial kind of thing. But I think they have a little bit of an easier time than some of the antisocial peeps going in there. Because we'd almost say the alternative would be like, well, let me tell you all the reasons that you suck, right? It would be like almost opposite affirmations of like highlighting their own weaknesses.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily take on that stance, but there are times where I've had, sometimes had to tell a client of like, I think that was kind of shitty. I think that you're really selfish there, and or like, hey, I think you really hurt that person. You're really being manipulative. You've taken advantage of this person many, many times. And I'm really slow to do that because I don't want to like inflict self-hatred, but sometimes that can be a little helpful at times just to get some outside perspective,
Yeah.
They aren't noticing that.
Fact checking some of their beliefs about being special or above others. It's like, you're not the most educated person in the world. Your IQ isn't, the highest in the world, and you treat people like you're the smartest person who ever existed. And that's just not true.
Yeah. And lots of times, narcissism is self-interest. You could even talk about, hey, you're having a lot of isolation, or that you get incentivized. There's reasons to change because you're not getting outcomes you desire. You have all these grandiosities of being this successful business person, but you can't hold a job because you can't tolerate authority. It might be advantageous of you to learn how to kiss ass a little bit. Let's practice. Again, that fake it till you make it on humility sometimes can work another way too, One of the things I hear, have you ever heard that thing with shame where it's like, I did a bad thing versus like, I'm a bad person?
Oh, yes. Guilt is I did bad. Shame is I am bad.
I did bad and I am bad. Okay. I never like use that phrase work to talk about that, but I feel like a lot of people talk about guilt and shame in that way. But I guess it's still kind of like that. But I think, I think that model of that is damaging because shame, there are healthy levels to it, and I think even culturally we're in this thing of like, don't shame them. No one should be ashamed, where it's like, actually they should be humiliated because they're acting like a fucking idiot in Starbucks. There are times where you should be ashamed of yourself, and I think it's like, I don't know why as a culture we've, I'm not saying we want to, shame people and make them small. I'm not saying we need to be worthless, but I think we have overcorrected to where like people need shame to behave appropriately and to like keep their ego in check and to treat themselves and others kindly, both too much, not enough. And so I think it's just this kind of bizarre overcorrection we've had where individualism is like the most important thing and everybody should be okay with everybody all the time, no matter how they're behaving. And I just don't know that that's true. I always say it's the most. It's like when I'm watching all these little kids do these TikTok dances in public, I'm like, where is your shame? You are humiliating yourself. Stop it. I like cannot even like tolerate. It's like so cringy. I'm like, please stop it. This is an alone time activity. Don't do this in public, please. Yeah, interesting.
I'm okay if they do it in public. I think if they are not blocking others from utilizing like public space, or I think in one of the other episodes you talked about they were doing it in maybe like a Starbucks where it's like limited space and there are a bunch of tables, like that's inappropriate.
Yeah, being like disruptive. Yeah, if you're like keeping other people.
Yeah. So if you're like out in the middle of a park and there's plenty of space for you to do that, that's okay. I'm okay with that. I don't think they necessarily need to be shamed for that. That's how they authentically express themselves. But if you're blocking people from getting needs met or getting their things done for the day, you're becoming a hindrance to society at that point.
Consider it. I think it's socially taboo to dance alone in public by yourself. So to do it while recording yourself seems pretty taboo. But yeah, are they like impeding on my wellness? No. But do I think it's should be embarrassing? I don't know why it's not embarrassing. I wouldn't go out and dance in the middle of the street with no music on and record myself. It's so weird. But once it's social media, it's fine. I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. That's a whole other thing.
Well, I think that brings up a good point of, where's that line between social norms and trying to get everybody to conform to one particular value set?
Yeah.
Where I think in society, we do accept more variations in values, whether that's, personality, religious, sexual orientation. But there are still individuals who think everything should be by the book, so to speak, and they're less accepting. And so there is always going to be discussions as generations change where some generations are like, that's completely taboo and inappropriate. But for them, that is their social norm. That's what everybody's doing.
That's true. Oh God, I'm like showing my age. I'm doing like old people shit. Oh no. You're right. Or something that came to mind too was like, I'm thinking over like the last couple of years, especially at the gym, there's like very full-figured women who will wear very little clothing. And I think back in the day, people might have said something like, she has no business wearing that. And now it's kind of like, damn girl, good for you. Like, I love that confidence, rock it, Yeah. And if it's, stuff like that too, where, how we present ourselves or, sexuality and clothing and all that really goes through like stages and phases in society. Yeah.
So sometimes we're shaming people in an attempt to
have them
get them to conform to our own value sets versus allowing them space to have their own individualized values. So
yeah, I like that.
And that's one thing I stumbled upon when I was looking for posts before I got like the genius idea. I bet there's a million on narcissism. I don't know why I'm looking for blanket shame. But it was somebody's trying to make me feel ashamed, or am I wrong for shaming so-and-so? And a lot of these are like, you're not respecting their personal value set.
Yeah. And that's what I think was happening in our post, where the dad is basically being like, if you do something that I don't like, I'm going to weaponize shame to dissolve your marriage or make your husband think differently of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is manipulative and controlling and yucky. I mean, I've definitely done that where like maybe somebody's doing something embarrassing in public and I'll amplify, kind of like rip them apart for a second to get them to stop doing that because they're embarrassing me. I've definitely done that. I can think of like 2 or 3 times that's happened. Not that I'm proud of that, but in a knee-jerk reaction, I've done that. You're like, stop it! You're an idiot. Stop it! Don't do that. Or like, or you're breaking a rule. You're gonna get us in trouble. Don't do that.
Yeah, I think about that in like the parent-child dynamic quite a bit, where it's if you don't like act correctly, I'm gonna leave without you and just leave you here in the store.
Like threat, like abandonment.
Yeah, it's probably very telling. I got that one a lot.
Okay. You got any thoughts on this one?
I think we hit them all.
Yeah. All right. So wrapping this bad boy up, summarize a bit. Shame helps us follow our own rules. Too much, we are worthless. Not enough, we are narcissistic. Shame can be kind of confusing and difficult to identify because it is an internal function of how we're thinking about ourselves and our own self-image. So sometimes we can notice that we're experiencing shame through like high amounts of self-depreciating humor, or we're not having any kind of self-care behavior go on. There are times where a sense of humiliation, embarrassment can be alleviated through humor. So that could be a shame attacking exercise or telling your story to somebody else. You can all laugh about it and not carry that alone. One of a good kind of starting point skills to start building confidence, we described confidence as having like appropriate amounts of shame, is called fake it till you make it, or act as if. So this is you identifying somebody who you feel is confident and kind of like imitating them. And then naturally it'll become your MO over time. Another way is to gain self-esteem through esteemable acts. So this comes back to our values, doing things that are meaningful to us, and then behaving in ways that we would find respectable in other people, whatever that looks like for you. If you're not sure how to start a self-care process, self-care, just love for yourself, you can kind of pick activities that fit broadly into 4 categories of purchasing something tangible, having a social goal, doing something self-care to make yourself feel like pampered a little bit, and then something health-oriented. We talked quite a bit about like nutrition and movement, all the shame cycles that go into that. So if you notice that you are continually not meeting your own goals, sometimes that's looking at your sticking points. Lots of times, especially with movement, that starts with the initiation. So doing things to make those barriers smaller. And sometimes that also looks like checking expectations that might not be reasonable in the first place. If you are somebody who is leaning towards narcissism, working on empathy can be helpful to notice how other people might be reacting to your selfishness. That could also be doing some fact checking, like maybe looking for ways in which you are not the shit at times, or ways that maybe you're not being honest with yourself. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all. It was
nice.
a lot.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Okay. All right, guys. This wraps up our breakdown of the 6 core emotion series. We hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll obviously continue to talk about them as they appear in various posts. So this is probably not the last time you'll hear some of this information. But that's what we got for you guys today. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, feedback. If you guys have questions, feel free to reach out. Email is assertivepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on Instagram @assertivepodcast. Until next time.